Kia ora te whānau. Thank you so much for tuning into HCSA Online today. It is so great to have you here with us. As many of you know, we've been continuing to meet in smaller groups lately, also known as hubs, under the current traffic light framework setting, being the red setting. For those of you who don't know what a hub is simply a way of continuing to be able to connect with one another, but also continuing to worship our God as well. For more information on these, please keep an eye out for your emails or look out for the updates on our website. Hubs are an awesome opportunity to be able to connect with each other, worship, and get to know your neighbour. And by your neighbour, I mean your brother or sister in Christ, but for you, this may actually be your neighbour, and you may want to invite your neighbour along to a hub or perhaps tune into HCSA Online. As a hub host, it has been really awesome getting to know some of you more and also being able to welcome new people to our hubs as well. For those who are wondering how to give your tithe, these can be given to your hub host or your hub leader, to the church office, or perhaps you may want to set up an automatic payment for these as well. Our pastoral care team have put together a prayer line, which is available every Sunday from 12 o'clock noon to 2 p.m. for those who would like prayer, and we would love to pray for you. And as you know, Easter isn't too far away now. Our upcoming Easter services will include walkthrough stations from Maundy Thursday to Easter Sunday with various times available. There'll be a Good Friday service at 10:30 a.m. online, an Easter Sunday sunrise service at 7 o'clock online, with another Easter service to follow online as well. But thank you everyone for tuning in today. Hope you have a wonderful day and a blessed week ahead. Ka kite.
Tēnā koutou whānau and welcome family. As has been a common thread over the last couple of years, what unprecedented times do we find ourselves living in? If you had told me just over a couple of years ago that we were on the verge of living in a global pandemic, I would have laughed, and yet here we are. As one of the leaders here at Hamilton City Salvation Army, I wanted to greet you and explain a little bit of how we are operating under the red level of the COVID protection framework, why we've come to these decisions, and where to from here. Currently, at the Hamilton City Salvation Army, we're still operating most of our community services under strict guidelines for the maximum safety of our staff, our clients, and the wider community. Our pastoral care team is operating and keeping busy, providing support and care for those who require it. The rest of our programs are, for this current season, doing one of three things. First, some have been paused. For example, most of our in-person gatherings, such as kids' church. Others have been modified. For example, our Sunday services and our home leagues have moved online and into hubs, while children's ministries are now operating online in small groups. The third option is that some of our smaller groups, such as the band, have been able to continue meeting under very strict guidelines. We acknowledge that these aren't all ideal. We all want to meet together with no restrictions and in whatever size group that we want to. However, there's more factors at play here than just our desires to return to a normal life. I want to assure you that all of our programs and services here at Hamilton Salvation Army are constantly being reviewed by the leadership. We take into consideration several factors, such as the age and vulnerability of our church family and wider community, government restrictions, Salvation Army guidelines, daily case numbers and other risk factors, while also considering our purpose to see people come into a deepening relationship with Jesus Christ. All things considered, Hamilton City Salvation Army leadership has decided to retain our COVID management plan as it is, with no large in-person services or programs under the red level, whatever the phase. Smaller groups may be allowed to meet, but this will be decided on a case-by-case basis if we can ensure all safety guidelines are adhered to. As the current outbreak has not yet peaked, we will be encouraging our groups and our leaders to modify their programs and services. This ensures that safe connection and operation is retained. Now, I understand that this is not the ideal situation or decision for most of us, and there will continue to be frustration as we navigate these bumpy COVID waters. But I ask you to continue to be kind to each other in love, knowing that one day we will look back on this. This isn't forever, and we're on the same team. God calls us to unity, even if it just means at the moment we're meeting in smaller groups. And I promise you, there will be great celebration in Hamilton City Salvation Army when we can come together in larger groups for worship again. I conclude with a reminder that we have started to worship in smaller groups, HCSA hubs. We have a number of hubs meeting across the city all throughout the week for worship and fellowship. These are great opportunities to connect and support each other, and I strongly encourage you to head over to our website for more information or contact our church office to register. And the great news is Jesus is registered in all of the groups, so you're guaranteed to meet him whichever one you join. Alternatively, each Sunday morning, HCSA Online is available from 8 a.m. should you wish to worship through that medium. Please continue to pray for an end to this pandemic, for the leaders and decision makers at this time, and for unity and healing in our nation and those who call Hamilton City Salvation Army home. Until we meet again, keep safe and stay close to Jesus. Ka kite.
Whaanau family, good morning. We're the Smith family. I'm Sonia.
And I'm Martin.
I'm Isaac. I'm Luke.
And this morning we're just going to have a bit of a chat about some of the challenges that we've faced this week. So Isaac, would you like to go first and tell us about what you did yesterday that was pretty cool but quite challenging?
Yeah, yesterday we went to the gal's house and Daisy taught me how to ride a motorbike, and once I started it was quite fun, but I had to learn step by step because there were a lot of steps with turning it on, turning it off for safety. And yeah, so you started off with the turning the key, then pressing a button, turning the accelerator on, which starts the engine, and then you put the gear up with your foot, and so then when you turn the accelerator, you will go, and when you want to come to a stop, you lower the accelerator, and once you have stopped, you lower the gear again and turn off the key, and yeah, went quite fast and it was quite fun.
Yeah, so a lot of steps you had to learn there.
Cool. For me personally, we've been redecorating the house in the last couple of years, and yeah, I've had to make quite a few decisions around colours and patterns and that kind of thing, and that can be quite overwhelming sometimes, because once it's done, and then I have to live with it. So sometimes that has felt quite overwhelming. So I found it quite helpful to write lists of things that I need to do this week, and to talk to other people about it too, and just try to break it down that way to make it a bit more manageable. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking for myself, like during the week I had a lot of days with a lot of challenges, a lot of things to do in a day, and when you mentioned the word steps, Isaac, then what sprung to mind is, as a child, my dad always used to tell my sister and I, when we were getting frustrated with doing something, learning something new or doing something, he would say step by step, and I can still hear it today that he says step by step. And I think if I could when I break all my busy jobs down to lots of little steps, they can be achievable. So that's a good lesson.
Cool. That's kind of a common thread, isn't it? Breaking it down. Yeah. So there might be some of you out there too that have had challenges this week, and I'd be able to think through how you broke those down. So thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Ka kite.
Thank you. Bye. Thanks for coming to our house.
How do you eat an elephant? I'm sure you've heard that saying, I'm sure you know the answer. The way that you eat an elephant is one bite at a time. Now, it's a guy called General Crichton Abrams who's attributed with that saying, and Abrams as a captain had led a tank battalion in Belgium in World War II. Now, Abrams was not trying to say that we should eat elephants. Do not eat elephants. That is not the message I'm trying to communicate to you today. What Abrams was saying is that when something is massive, when it seems like an elephant in the middle of your path and it's daunting and overwhelming and seems impossible, don't tackle it all at once. Break it down into bite-sized bits. Just take one bite at a time, or one step at a time, or one day at a time, or in his case, it was one battle at a time. He said that quote in the context of warfare, and it's in the context of warfare I want us to consider that quote, because that was the story of Joshua in Joshua chapter 12. He had a lot of battles that he took one battle at a time.
These are the kings of the land that Joshua and the Israelites conquered on the west side of the Jordan, from Baal-Gad in the valley of Lebanon to Mount Halak, which rises toward Seir. Their lands Joshua gave as an inheritance to the tribes of Israel according to their tribal divisions: the hill country, the western foothills, the Arabah, the mountain slopes, the desert, and the Negev, the lands of the Hittites, Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. The king of Jericho won. The king of Ai near Bethel won. The king of Jerusalem won. The king of Hebron won. The king of Jarmuth won. The king of Lachish won. The king of Eglon won. The king of Gezer won. The king of Debir, 1. The king of Gerer, 1. The king of Hormah, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1.
One. Can you hear it every time? A king is listed, a battle is listed, everyone is mentioned, everyone is counted. The way that Joshua won the war was one battle at a time. The way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. The way that the children of Israel came into the promised land and took possession of that land that God had promised them was one bite at a time. This list of the defeated kings might seem like one of the most boring parts of the Bible, a part that we could just skip straight over and get to something more interesting. But as Christians, we believe that the Bible still speaks to us today, that even these boring bits can bring some kind of meaning into our life. So how do we find meaning in a passage like this? Just a list of strange places? Well, I've got two thoughts. One thing we can do in a list like this is we can look for the repeated ideas. What are the things that are said over and over again? And in this case, it's the word one. There's something very significant about the word one every time it is mentioned in that list. And another thing that we should consider is the context of the list. That is, what is happening before this list and what is happening after that list, and how does that help us to understand what that list is about. So, in the case of Joshua, the position of the list is really important. You see, it's chapter 12, but the first 11 chapters of Joshua have been leading up to that. The first half of the book is a story of how they've arrived in the land. Firstly, that's chapters 1 to 5, and then 6 through to 11 is about how they fought to gain possession of the land. Now, chapters 6 to 11 don't contain all of the fights that happened, all of the battles aren't mentioned, just the key ones like Jericho and Ai, and this time where 5 of the kings in Canaan made a coalition and fought against Israel. Key battles are mentioned, but not all of them. All of them are listed in chapter 12. Now, as we're going through this book, we have skipped through some of those battles, so you might like to take the time to read it through on your own. You might also like to take the time to watch Joshua on the Bible Project. That gives a really helpful overview of the whole book, and it also helps us to make sense of the violence we find in those chapters, because if you find that a little disturbing, then that's perfectly valid. So we come then to the second half of the book, and the second half of the book is chapter 13 to 24. That tells the story of how they are in the land and how the land is allocated out and they begin to live in the land. So in between these two halves we have Joshua chapter 12, the chapter we're looking at today, and what it is a list, a summary of everything that has happened up to that point, a summary of the 31 kings that have been defeated. It brings down the curtain, so to speak, on the first half of the book. They are now in the land. They have conquered the land of Canaan.
The king of Debir, 1. The king of Gerer, 1. The king of Hormah, 1. The king of Arad, 1. The king of Libnah, 1. The king of Adullam, 1. The king of Makkedah, 1. The king of Bethel, 1. The king of Tappuah, 1. The king of Hepher, 1. The king of Aphek, 1. The king of Lasharon, 1. The king of Madon, 1. The king of Hazor, 1. The king of Shimron Meron, 1. The king of Akshaph, 1. The king of Taanach, 1. The king of Megiddo, 1.
So Joshua 12 begins by going back a bit in time to the time of Moses. And firstly, it tells us the story of how the people under Moses came up and took some of the kings on the east side of the Jordan. So they weren't quite in Canaan yet, but they'd conquered some of those kings there, and 2 tribes and a half of one other tribe actually asked if they could stay and live in that land, and they were allowed to. Then we skip on to the time of Joshua. Now that first part about Moses is written in a prose kind of style, but when we get to the bit where we have Joshua's victories listed, it becomes a list. And in fact, a list like this was a common thing for ancient Near Eastern kings at that time. They would write victory lists. All the kings they had vanquished and the cities they had burned would be listed. And so Joshua's list takes the same kind of form. First of all, he tells us about the 16 southern kings that he conquered, and then the 15 northern kings. 31 kings in all. You might be wondering, how is it that you could have 31 kings in one country? The country of Israel is actually only about the size of the Waikato. How could you have 31 kings? Well, that's because they didn't rule over whole countries. Actually, they were only king over a city, a small city. In fact, a city like Jericho was only 8 acres. Some were bigger, but most of these battles were small battles. So the picture then that we have in Joshua 12 is a series of mostly small battles that happened actually over many years across the whole country, all kinds of different terrain, but the collective effect of these battles meant they won the war. These small bites meant that they ate the elephant. So this boring list isn't just a boring list. This boring list actually is a list of God's faithfulness, again and again, battle after battle, one battle at a time. This boring list is proof that God keeps his promises, because God had promised his children years ago, right back with Abraham, he'd said that they were going to have this land, and now they were here. God kept his promise. This list is proof that God was victorious. This is God's victory list. Battle after battle, they won. And this list does speak to us today. It speaks to us about the significance of one. One people with one God fighting one battle at a time. They fought as one people. Now, they weren't really one people, they were 12 different tribes, and as they'd left Egypt, a whole lot of people had kind of joined in with them as they went out, and over the next years, they'd picked up some other people too, people like Rahab, but when it came to fighting, they fought together as one people, one community, and even those tribes that had settled on the eastern side of the Jordan, they came back and they fought together. They were stronger as one. Even those 31 kings in Israel, they didn't stand a chance against that one united people. They were stronger together. And so are we. When we fight our battles alone, we're not so strong. But when we stand together, when we invite other people into our battles, they stand with us. They encourage us. They push us on and they keep us accountable. We need to stand and fight our battles as one people with one God, fighting one battle at a time. Now, the Israelites were different to the Egyptians and the Canaanites. You see, the Egyptians and the Canaanites had many different gods that they worshipped, but the Israelites just worshipped the one God, this one supreme being, the creator God who was in control of the whole universe, Yahweh. And for them, everything was about that God. When the ancient Near Eastern kings made their victory lists, they made them in the first person. They said, I have conquered and I have vanquished. But the list that Joshua gives us is not like that. Yes, there is mention that Joshua did lead them into battle and Joshua did fight, but going back to the beginning of Joshua, we are told all the way through that story that God gave them the land and God was with them and God even fought for them. This was not Joshua's victory list, this was God's victory list. The Israelites put total faith in God. They were 100% committed to him, to the point that in Joshua chapter 11, after one of their big battles, they took all the enemy's chariots and they burnt them. And they took all their horses and they hamstrung them. Now that doesn't mean they killed them. It does mean though that they severed a tendon and it made it so that the horses lost their power. So the horses were no good for fighting, only good for farming. Now, the reason that matters is that at that time, your horses and your chariots were your sign of wealth and power and strength. And they destroyed all of those of the enemies. They didn't want any of it for themselves. Like the psalmist has said, some trust in horses and some trust in chariots, but we trust in the name of the Lord our God. You see, for Joshua and the children of Israel Israel, they were already strong. They were already powerful, and it had nothing to do with what they had and everything to do with who they were with. But I do wonder if it was tempting. I do wonder if they might have thought, well, we'll just put a few of those aside just in case God doesn't come through sometime, just as a bit of a backup. I do wonder if it would have been tempting for Joshua to tell that story about what he had done. I mean, he was the leader and he'd done a good job. They'd conquered lots of people. Was it tempting to trust themselves or trust what they had? I think it's tempting for us. We can be tempted to put our trust in the things that we have, to build up our assets and the things we have and trust in those things. We can be tempted to rely on the things we've achieved. But for Joshua and the children of Israel, they were 100% committed to their one God. They were one people with one God, fighting one battle at a time.
The king of Akshaph won. The king of Taanach won. The king of Megiddo won. The king of Kadesh won. The king of Jokneam in Carmel won. The king of Dor in Naphoth Dor won. The king of Goyim in Gilgal won. The king of Tirzah won. 31 kings in all.
Now we could be forgiven for reading Joshua chapter 12 and thinking, awesome, they're in the land, the battle is won, it's all a done deal, game over, it's going to be honky-dory and plain sailing for them from here on in. But it's not quite. Yes, they are in the land and a great milestone has been reached, but there are still going to be battles that they have to fight. There are still going to be things that flare up from time to time and they're going to have to deal with them. They're still going to have to eat the elephant one bite at a time and fight the fight one battle at a time, even though they have won the war. It's a bit like a job. Well, at least like some jobs, like you have the job, you've got the job is yours, you do the job, but to keep that job, there's still work to do, and so there might be a test or an accreditation that you have to do from time to time. You've won the war, but there are still battles to fight. You have the job, but there's still work to do. It's a bit like the kingdom of God. Now, the kingdom of God is here. The ultimate battle has been won. Jesus' death and resurrection meant that death and sin have been conquered. We stand in victory. But that doesn't mean everything is honky-dory and plain sailing from here. No, life is going to be a series of battles. Just like for the Israelites, there was a variety of battles. Some big, but mostly small, and over a period of years, some in the hills and some in the valleys and in the desert and the wilderness. So our life is going to have a lot of battles, some big and some small, and some might be spiritual or emotional, some are going to be practical, some are going to be to do with our family and our relationships, our finances, maybe our mental or physical health. We're going to have battles that we're going to need to fight. But the message that we can take from Joshua 12 is this: take those battles one battle at a time, one bite at a time. Don't get ahead of yourself and try and eat the whole elephant. You can't eat an elephant in one bite. Just deal with the thing that is in front of you now, and do that in community with God and with His people. If I gave you a piece of paper right now and asked you to write your own victory list, I wonder what you'd put on it. When you think back over your life to the battles that you've had, the challenges that you've had, the elephants that have been on your path, I wonder when you reflect on those things what your list would look like. I might write, God got me. He's given me motivation when I sometimes just don't feel like getting out of bed in the morning. That's one. God's helped me to get through a situation that left me feeling really hurt. One. He's given me the right doctor at exactly the right time. One. He's helped me many times do things I haven't wanted to do, like have hard conversations and apologise to people. That's one, and probably quite a number of ones. He's given me peace when I've got ahead of myself and started worrying because I was looking too far in the future. That's one. And you know, that's probably one He's going to have to give me tomorrow. Maybe even several times tomorrow. That's an ongoing battle, but you know, every time I need it, He is faithful. And He gives me what I need, and we are victorious, and it's another one. It's another victory, and each small victory really matters. Paul said, we are more than conquerors through Christ who loved us. So be victorious. We stand on the victorious side with God, and He has won the war. So stand with God and His people and take those battles one bite at a time.